Oh my gosh, mind blower, mind blower. It's just like, hi, I'm Carla with Race to Walk, and today I'm going to be doing a review on a book by C.S. Lewis that you might not have heard of, and that is The Dark Tower. But before we get started, a little bit about this channel. Here we share good thoughts about good words, and on Tuesdays I publish videos about books, and then on Fridays I host a live Bible study at Race to Walk on Instagram, and then I upload that later here to YouTube. So this is actually an unfinished book. The story of this is that William Hooper, who actually wrote the introduction to this, this was a story that Lewis never finished. So C.S. Lewis died on November 22nd, 1963, which is the same day that JFK was shot. So I'm just going to read this from the intro. In January 1964, I went to stay with Dr. and Mrs. Austin Ferrer at Keble College while Lewis's brother, Major W.H. Lewis, began clearing out the kilns, the family home, preparatory to moving into a smaller home where I was later to join him. The Lewis brothers felt little of that veneration for manuscripts so typical among many of us, and Major Lewis, after setting aside those papers which had special significance for him, began disposing of others. Thus it was that a great many things which I was never able to identify found their way onto a bonfire which burned steadily for 3 days. Happily, however, the Lewis's gardener, Fred Paxford, knew that I had the highest regard for anything in the master's hand, and when he was given a great quantity of C.S. Lewis's notebooks and papers to lay on the flames, he urged the major to delay till I should have a chance to see them. By what seems more than coincidence, I appeared at the kiln that very day and learned that unless I carried the papers away with me that afternoon, they would be destroyed. This story, The Dark Tower, was part of them. A friend of mine told me that Puddlegum in The Silver Chair was actually based on Lewis's gardener. And if you know that story, Puddlegum is the one that actually ground out the flames of the fire, and is kind of the hero of the story. She said Lewis was really prophetic about that because, he was the one that saved this book. So we have Fred Paxton to thank for what is in this. This is like the most mind-blowing story I have ever read. So it's actually kind of designed to come after Out of the Silent Planet, which is part of Lewis's space/cosmic/ransom trilogy. The three are Out of the Silent Planet, Pearlandria, and That Hideous Strength. This was intended to take place after that hit Out of the Silent Planet. So I'm just gonna stop a little bit. I have to tell you the story. So when I was at HBU in the apologetics program, the very first semester that I took classes, I took a class with William Lane Craig on his book On Guard, which is like his basic apologetics book. And so anyway, we go in there, and this is my very first semester. I had just been in graduate school for a few weeks. I'll be honest with you, I didn't even know who William Lane Craig was before I entered the program. So we're sitting there. We spend 3 days on the cosmological argument for God. We get to the point in On Guard where he's talking about Boltzmann's brains. It's kind of like a theory for the multiverses. So I'm looking at the picture of the illustration of Boltzmann's theory, and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, this looks like The Wood Between the Worlds in The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis. So the guy was actually at Oxford, and so I said, Dr. Craig, I said, this looks like The Woods Between the Worlds in The Magician's Nephew. The way Lewis describes Charn, and that it's like this big red cold sun that's dying, is kind of fit the way Boltzmann's theory was. I said, do you think that was that Lewis got that idea from that multiverse theory? And he said, well, Lewis wasn't into that. He was a literature professor. And I said, yeah, but he was at Oxford, so don't you think maybe he might have been around and been part of those conversations? And he said, well, I think that's speculative. So I didn't say anything else, because again, like, this is literally, I'm just a few weeks into graduate school. I'm in this class with all these, philosophy graduate students, and so I didn't say anything else. So at the end of that week, we have a lunch with other people in the apologetics program, and I'm sitting there looking at that book. This was the last day of the class, and I said, I swear this is The Woods Between the Worlds. Look at this. And so one of the people sitting there was like, oh yeah, and I can't remember who he said, but Lewis was friends with the physicist that, was involved in all these theories at the time. So all that time, I've been convinced that The Wood Between the Worlds was inspired by this idea of multiverses. So then I read this book, and I am telling you, this is, I'm not going to say the whole thing. It's very short because it's just a partial story, but it is about, you think it's about time travel in the beginning, but actually it's about multiverses. And there's a little bit of, the time travel is just that there's like a little bit of slippage of time in between the worlds, which is basically, that's how Chronicles of Narnia is too, right? The time doesn't totally line up. So obviously Lewis was into it. Dr. Craig, obviously he was. I was reading this book, and you kind of have to read to really get the full, like, what? You kind of have to read all of the space trilogy, because then you're kind of thinking, the whole time I was thinking, what? Like, how does this fit? And then you're wanting, because you don't have the end, you just have part of it. And there's actually a couple of, there were a couple of pages that were missing, so that there'll be a skip, and then you go on to the next part of the story. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. It is such a mind blower. I was reading this, and the whole time I'm thinking, how is it possible I've never heard anybody mention this in my program? Like, that's all we do is read. I mean, we do more than read Lewis, but we read a lot of Lewis. So I'm looking at an unexpected journal. I mean, we quote Lewis all the time. And I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, how is it possible? How is it possible that nobody's ever mentioned this? I honestly was thinking, are they all in another group somewhere else talking about this without me? I mean, I just don't even understand this. So the third issue of An Unexpected Journal is on courage, strength, and hope. There's an essay in there where it's by Seth Meyers, and he quotes, it's basically on Hamilton, and it's 11,000 words, and his goal in that was to quote every single work of fiction that Lewis wrote. This is not in there. Oh my goodness. Okay, so it's such a mind bender, and you sit there, and this was, when I read this, it was before everything shut down, and I was on my way down to one of my classes and at HBU, and I took Metro because I hate the drive, and I'm so glad that I wasn't driving after I read this, because I probably would have gotten in an accident. I was just like, could not stop thinking about, what is this? Like, and you think, I can't even tell you, there's not enough of a story here for me to, if I tell you, then I'll be telling you everything that's in the story. But anyway, it's just, if you like C.S. Lewis and you've read his oh my gosh, mind blower. It's just like, I so want to know the end of this. It's like, there's just so many options. There's more than that partial story in there. There's also several other ones. So there's The Man Born Blind. That one is really interesting. A lot of Lewis, both his fiction and his nonfiction. You know that a lot of times he writes a story that illustrates the concept that he's writing about in his nonfiction. So for example, That Hideous Strength, which is book 3 in the Cosmic Ransom Space Trilogy, whatever you want to call it, that is an illustration of his essay, The Abolition of Man. I have a video review on both of those. So The Man Born Blind is actually, it's kind of an illustration of his essay, Meditations in a Tool Shed, from God in the Dock. There's another one called The Shoddy Lands, and that was really interesting to me. If you get this book, I'm just interested to know what you think. It seems to me to be about consumerism, and it also seems to be very familiar to me with The Great Divorce, which is another one of his books that I love. Okay, so then there's another one called Ministering Angels. If you read that one, let me know your thoughts on that one. It's kind of, I don't know. It's the most, I don't know how to put this. It's not raunchy, but it's the closest to raunchy that I've read anything of by Lewis. If you've read it, let me know what you think. If you think the same way. It's just kind of interesting. And then another short story called Forms of Things Unknown. And it's about mysterious disappearances that happen on trips to the moon. Now keep in mind, this was written before the space landing. So anyway, and then the other one that's really, really interesting that also is not complete. So the other 4 short stories are complete, but After 10 Years and The Dark Tower aren't. They're unfinished works. It's about Helen and Menelaus. It's after the fall of Troy. And that's another one that if you read it, you kind of wonder, like, how would this have turned out? Like, where was he going with this? And this was he actually wrote that after his wife Joy died. And there's a little bit of a description about this story. And he said, Hooper said, another friend of his, Roger Lanston Green, said that he just, after his wife died, he said it was like the wellspring of creativity. It just kind of dried up. He didn't have the joy that he needed to be able to write the stories like he had before. So, and so here's the thing. I was going to say this. So, the other thing, and so if you read The Dark Tower, the other thing is he talks about forms of things, for the interaction between forms and spirit. And I was reading it and I was trying to think, what other writing does he have that has pulled on that, that he's drawing from? So it's kind of like, I kind of need to read this again to see where that's coming from. But anyway, so these are so interesting. I think it will give you a little bit different perspective of Lewis, I think. And the other thing, reading these stories that kind of encouraged me is that, I have partial stories out there, and I have stories that I think are great ideas, and I have, a good chunk of words written, but I have no plot, and I don't know where they're going. So this to me was kind of encouraging that this amazing writer had some of the same problems. But it can kind of drive you crazy. It's like, where was this going? How does this fit with these other stories? So, it's kind of interesting that in Lewis's time, there was a lot of discussion about, traveling to space and is there other life out there? His stories, you can see this in Narnia, his interplanetary books, that, he was writing apologetically and even if there is, it doesn't mean that God isn't. And so it's just such an amazing writer. It's a brain bender. If you read this, let me know what you think, if you see parallels to other works that he's done. But anyway, yeah, Dark Tower, gotta read it. So thanks for joining me, and I will see you next time.